When I saw the red and blue lights flashing across the pine trees that lined my driveway, I thought I'd taken a wrong turn into someone else's nightmare. The cops were already there. 3 cruisers parked across the gravel road that led to my cabin. Their headlights carved through the misty mountain air like angry eyes. I killed my truck's engine and sat there for a second, fingers tightening on the steering wheel. Something was off. I wasn't supposed to be home yet. My name's Eli Porter, and after 6 months working oil rigs up in Alaska, I've been counting the days until I could finally crash in my quiet mountain cabin, the one thing I own outright after my divorce. No HOA drama, no nosy neighbors. Just peace, pine, and a stock fridge. At least, that's what I thought I had. When I stepped out, the air smelled like rain and trouble. A woman's voice rose over the police chatter, sharp, nasal, and painfully familiar. Karen. Karen was the self-appointed ruler of our unofficial homeowners association, a woman who somehow turned a small mountain neighborhood into a personal empire of rules, fines, and gossip. She'd once told me my cabins with stain didn't meet community aesthetics. I'd told her, politely, that my cabin wasn't part of her HOA jurisdiction. That hadn't gone over well. Now, there she was, in her pressed pastel jacket and too bright lipstick, standing on my porch, gesturing dramatically as 2 officers listened. "Oh, thank God you're here," she called out as I approached, waving her hand like a flag. This man, this stranger, was attempting to break into this property. One of the cops turned toward me. "Sir, this your place?" I handed him my ID and keys, jaw tightening. "Yeah, has been for the past 4 years." Karen let out a shocked laugh, the kind of sound someone makes when they think you're lying. "That's ridiculous. This cabin's been empty for months. The owner left, abandoned it. I've been taking care of it for the community." I blinked at her. "You've been what?" "Maintaining it," she said proudly. "The grass, the garbage bins, ensuring no squatters moved in. I even had the locks changed for safety." For a moment, I couldn't even form words. She'd changed the locks? I looked at the cop nearest me, who was frowning now. "Sir," he said carefully, "do you have proof of ownership?" "I've got the deed inside," I said, then glanced toward the front door, where I noticed something new, a brass "Welcome Home" sign nailed right under the porch light, and a cheery floral wreath that definitely wasn't mine. Karen beamed. "I added those for curb appeal." I almost laughed. Almost. "Instead," I said, "you've been on my property without permission." She waved her hand dismissively. "Don't be dramatic. You weren't even here. I was doing everyone a favor." That's when something inside me shifted. Not rage, not yet, but something colder. The kind of calm that comes before a storm. Because here's the thing Karen didn't know. The cabin wasn't just mine. It was wired. Every window, every inch of the porch, the drive, even the mailbox, monitored 24/7 by motion-sensitive cameras. I'd installed the system after a break-in 2 years ago. It uploaded footage directly to a secure cloud. I hadn't looked at it much since leaving for Alaska, but suddenly I knew I'd be pulling every single frame the second I got inside. Karen had no idea the cabin had been watching her the whole time. The cops eventually told her to stand back while I opened the door, using my key, which slid into the new lock just fine. Inside, I saw the disaster she'd made. My furniture had been rearranged like some twisted open house display. A vase of fake flowers sat on the dining table. The fireplace mantel was decorated with seashells and framed motivational quotes. And on the coffee table, God help me, was a small framed photo of Karen and her cat. The cop whistled. "Looks like she's been settling in." Karen's voice rang out from the doorway. "I told you, I was maintaining it. Just staging things for potential buyers, since the property appeared abandoned." I turned slowly. "Buyers." She crossed her arms. "You weren't around. The HOA board, and I thought it best to list it before it fell into disrepair. You listed my cabin." "Only temporarily," she snapped. "And we had interest, too. You should be thanking me. You left it empty, and that lowers the neighborhood's appeal." I stared at her, pulse hammering. I'd seen her type before, the kind of person who hides behind rules, pretending righteousness while trampling everyone else. The cops were clearly uncomfortable now. You understand this man owns a property, one said gently. You had no authority to change locks or enter the home. Karen scoffed. Authority? I have responsibility. Someone has to care about this community. Then she turned to me, smiling that tight, patronizing smile. You can't just vanish for months and expect things to stay the same, Eli. People move on. Neighborhoods evolve. Maybe it's time you let go. For a second, the urge to say something explosive nearly won. But I didn't, because anger, when controlled, can be useful. Instead, I said, calm and slow, you're right, Karen, things are going to change. When the officers left, they told me to file a report if I found any damages. I assured them I would. Karen lingered in the driveway, pretending to check her phone, clearly hoping for another argument. I ignored her and went straight to my office nook, where the monitor for my surveillance system waited. The login screen blinked awake, and within seconds, the feed filled the display, months of footage compressed into neat little time stamps. Motion alerts spiked all over the calendar. Karen had been here a lot. I clicked the first alert from 2 months ago. The video showed her marching up the driveway with a clipboard and 2 men in polo shirts. She used a key to unlock the front door, waving them inside like she owned the place. The timestamp read July 14th, 2:42 p.m. My stomach turned. Another clip, July 20th, Karen pulling out my old garden gnomes and tossing them into a trash bag. August 2nd, a truck unloading furniture. September 10th, a for sale sign being hammered into the ground. My ground. Every single act, every trespass, recorded in high definition. And in the most recent footage, October 28th, 11:37 a.m., Karen stood right on the porch, talking to someone I didn't recognize, a man in a realtor's blazer. She handed him an envelope and said something that made my jaw tighten. His not coming back. His practically giving it up. I'll handle the paperwork. The man nodded. They shook hands. The camera's MIC wasn't clear enough for every word, but I heard enough to understand what she was doing. Fraud, trespassing, attempted sale. Hell, maybe even identity theft if she forged anything. Karen wasn't just nosy. She was dangerous. That night, as the rain started tapping against the windows, I sat on my couch surrounded by her tacky decorations, my laptop open to the police report form. But I didn't click submit. Not yet. Because something in me wanted more than legal justice. I wanted her to feel what it was like to lose control, to watch everything she'd built crumble without knowing how. A question burned in my mind as I scrolled through more footage, watching her parade around my property like she was queen of the mountain. What's the best way to destroy someone who's built their world on control? And then the answer came, not from anger, but from precision. Karen wanted to control the narrative, to make the community see me as the outsider, the careless neighbor who didn't belong. Fine. I'd show them exactly who she really was, through her own actions, her own words. The cameras had everything. All I had to do was make sure everyone saw it. And by the time I was done, Karen wouldn't just lose her fake empire. She'd lose the one thing she cared about most, her reputation. The next morning, the mountain looked the same. Pines, fog, a stolen sunlight slanting across the porch, but everything felt calibrated, like a stage after the curtains had been fixed. I brewed coffee and set up my laptop at the kitchen table. The cabin's decor still belonged to Karen's idea of tasteful, a throw pillow that said bless in cursive, a scented candle shaped like a pine cone. All trophies of a presumptuous occupation. I left them where they were. Every little ridiculous thing would play a role. First, I catalogued. I labeled each clip, time-stamped every conversation, and pulled out stills that showed obvious trespass, her handing over documents, the for sale sign with her initials, the men unloading furniture with a grin in the background. Precision makes accusations incontrovertible. I knew that when you present the facts in unadorned sequence, people fill in the moral gaps themselves. Next, I needed witnesses. The footage told the story, but reputations fall faster when neighbors, the very people Karen cultivated with casseroles and corrugated smiles, believed the story was true. I walked the lanes, my boots crunching on frost, and knocked on doors. Some neighbors knew pieces. Some had been gently bullied into silence by Karen's small reign. I didn't ask for confessions. I asked for names, times offhand memories that would corroborate my timeline. Did you see anyone putting up a for sale sign on October 28th? Did anyone ask about my keys in July? People are easier to recruit with indignation than with sympathy. After a few cups of coffee and an honest recounting of the footage, without showing anything yet, several nodded. Some with that guilty look that said they'd turned a blind eye to keep their own peace. Mrs. Halvorsen from 2 doors down said she'd seen Karen walking up the driveway with a realtor. The toddler from house number 9 pointed out the truck that had donated the fake furniture. Little threads all around the neighborhood. I pulled them in. I didn't go straight to the police. Legal routes are surgical and slow. I wanted the kind of fallout you can't disinfect, the social one. Karen's weapon had been a control over the narrative of the neighborhood, who was respectable, who belonged, who could be shamed into silence. I planned to steal that narrative back and break it into pieces small enough the wind could carry them. First, an email. I assembled a clean, concise packet, high-res stills, timestamps, a written timeline, and a single line of introduction. I sent it to every address on the neighborhood list, to the HOA's board, the ones Karen bullied, to the small mailing list for the Mountain Community's newsletter, and, importantly, to the one woman who loved gossip above all else, Mrs. Lennox, who ran the local community Facebook group. The subject line read, "Evidence of an authorized occupancy and attempted sale of private property. Please read." No flourish. No venom. Facts. Within an hour, my inbox began to clutter. Replies were a mix of astonishment, denial, and outrage. The thread in the community group ignited. People who had feared Karen's wrath now found a kind of collective courage in the ledger of images I'd dropped into their laps. Comments scrolled. Is this true? We trusted her. I called her about the community garden. She said she had the right. The momentum felt like a snowball tipping down a slope. Karen realized this was different when she knocked on my door mid-afternoon, hands fluttering with indignation. "Eli, what is this?" she demanded. "You've sent dirty lies around the neighborhood." She tried to sound bruised, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. She'd built a fort on the soft soil of other people's fear and now felt the first tremor. "Facts, Karen," I said. "All of them. If you have proof you're on a right to act, show it." I watched her collect herself, search for a line of attack. She had none that mattered. She did what any cornered tyrant does, attack reputations. She accused me of hacking her phone, planting evidence, doctoring video. She called me a troublemaker. She reminded neighbors of the good deeds she claimed. Trash cleanups, block parties, the little postcard she'd send out every holiday. I didn't deny the postcard. Petty kindness had cheap leverage in her hands. Instead, I let the facts breathe. The cameras had dates and unbroken chains of footage. The more she shouted, the smaller her fortress looked because her own words, caught on the porch of my sea, contradicted her. That night the community meeting happened in the old church basement, the place where wedding cakes and Parker's sermons mingled with the smell of boiled coffee. I'd expected a whispering hour and instead walked into the eye of the storm. The room was packed. Karen sat at the head like a queen at court, only now the crowns felt fake. I didn't speak for a while. I let her make the first move. She moved with practiced ease, pivoting from victim to valiant protector. But then I stood, walked to the front, and asked for the projector. I kept my voice steady as I clicked through the clips. No narrative, just footage. The July afternoon she let herself in. The truck on August 2nd. The handshake with the realtor. Every frame a brick. I watched faces fall in the glow of their own kitchen lights reflected on the screen. The priest I'd mowed lawns for, the realtor who'd sold us on a community of trust, the neighbors who had always nodded at Karen at Sunday market. People shifted. Mrs. Lennox whispered, "Oh my God." Mr. Chen, who had once received a note threatening a fine for leaving his recycling out an hour early, stood up, his hands in his pockets, small and tremulous. "She used us," he said. Simple. True. Karen's rebuttal was a single, bewildered scream. "You can't smear me with your cameras." But cameras aren't smear tools. They are mirrors in high definition. You can hide from a mirror, but it doesn't change what it shows. A handful of neighbors stepped up with their stories, offered corroboration of times she'd shown up on their porches, of the persuasive letters she'd sent, of the hush money she'd never admitted to asking for. That web of corroboration changed the tableau from accusation to a verdict in progress. The committee agreed to investigate, but in the room, the real judgment had already been rendered. Karen's moral authority had been ripped into shards. But I wanted her downfall to sting in the place she prized most, reputation. A formal reprimand or even a fine wouldn't taste like victory. I wanted her to watch her K-ful image disintegrate online and in print. So, the next morning, I compiled an anonymous packet, photos, timestamps, witness statements, and sent it to the local paper, the kind that still printed a Tuesday edition and left copies at the post office. The headline the editor wrote the next day wasn't clever. It was factual. Neighborhood leader accused of unauthorized use, attempted sale of private property. The article quoted neighbors, included a few stills, and reproduced excerpts of Karen's own words from the footage where she boasted about handling the paperwork. She tried to sue for defamation. The threat was a sounding gust against my cabin door. No teeth, only hot air. Lawyers are expensive. Truth is cheap when it has records. The county prosecutor opened an inquiry, and the HOA asked her to step down pending an investigation. People stopped inviting her to block cleanups. That might have been enough for some revenge, public humiliation, loss of status. But Karen's cruelty had a different shade. She had made a game of controlling small decisions. Who could leave a bike on a stoop? Which flag was tasteful enough? Whose lawn ornaments were acceptable? Even after she'd been unseated, the mechanism she'd used lingered in offhand fines and fare. I wanted the neighborhood to remember what had happened, not to obsess, but to heal. So I organized something that could blunt the memory of fear with the warmth of ownership. We called it My Cabin, My Neighbor's Day. A disclaimer, a refurbishment. People came with paint and power sanders, bringing casseroles and the kind of baked goods Karen used to parade. They painted my porch a bright, defiant blue, the kind of blue Karen would call gauche if she was still handing out fines. Kids painted small gnomes and planted them in neat rows in the garden. People laughed like they'd had permission to laugh for years. Karen watched from her car across the lane. She wasn't banned from looking. Her expression was a private space of ruin, anger, disbelief, and a glint of the old control without the instruments to wield it. I could have walked over and said anything venomous. I chose not to. Let the look be its own verdict. A week later, the prosecutor's office called me in for a deposition. Evidence. They said, tampering. They were investigating. I answered every question with the same steady voice I'd used in the church basement. I handed over original footage, metadata, and a list of neighbors who'd agreed to provide statements. The law moves differently than gossip. It requires patience. But under that patience, consequences accumulate like frost. Karen's life unraveled in mundane but painful ways. The HOA's insurance pulled a clause. Her standing at the community garden was revoked. A volunteer group rescinded the plaque dedicated to her service. People who had once feared her now nodded in the grocery store with the subtle, quiet civility you grant to someone you've forgiven but not forgotten. There was still the sliver of something I hadn't expected. Remorse. It came in a single, furtive letter slid under my door, written in cramped, small letters. I thought I was protecting everyone. I'm sorry if I hurt you. She signed it with only her initials. It read like an apology that wanted to be a negotiation. I didn't reply. Revenge tastes different depending on what you seek. For me, the taste of victory was not the collapse but the return. The quiet mornings with my blue porch catching the sun. The neighbor kids who now kicked the ball past my mailbox and didn't glance over their shoulders. The sense of a home that belonged unapologetically to me. I wanted no blood, no spectacular ruin. I wanted my life back, untampered, ordinary, reclaimed. On a late autumn afternoon, as the first thin snow feathered the pines, I stood on my porch and watched Karen drive away. She had packed her car with the trophies of her influence, quilts, a brass plaque, a stack of neatly folded newsletters. The car's taillights blinked a slow, unreadable farewell. She had been dethroned not by dramatic confrontation but by quiet instruments, cameras, neighbors' courage, the slow arithmetic of evidence. Power built on petty cruelties collapses when what it's built from is shown for what it is, small, fragile, and unworthy of reverence. The surveillance feed still hummed in the background, the cold eye of technology that had recorded her trespass and my reclaiming. I left it on that winter evening, but didn't watch it. I set the thermostat, made a pot of tea, and let the cabin be a place that observed life instead of policing it. Outside, someone's radio played faintly, a song about home. I smiled, not because I had won something to boast about, but because I'd found a way back to the one thing Karen had tried to steal, my story.